Camden Joy, a rant. 1. Who the fuck is Camden Joy? When recommending Camden Joy's work to my students, I've come upon the problem of explaining his project. Where to begin? The handwritten posters proselytizing for bands they've never heard of, or protesting the now almost quaint-seeming commercialization of so-called indie rock? The novels, one, a manic, fragmented, metafictional coming-of-age story detailing a character named Camden Joy's psychotic obsession with a feminist icon from the early 90s. The other, a comparatively straightforward American road novel that might call to mind other straightforward American road novels if the book didn't so bizarrely insert a fictional Camden Joy as the drummer of the real-life rock band Cracker, then document Joy as he spends the band's first tour coming to terms with his newfound homosexuality, all the while dropping hints that the whole thing might actually be an allegory for the first Iraq War. What about starting with the novellas or the essays that aren't really essays, but rather excavations, words dug out by the one-man chain gang that is Camden Joy, and then hummed, sung, and sometimes shouted, propelled like Pentecostal sermons by their rhythm and urgency, coalescing into associative storms where dialectical coherency is sacrificed in favor of the brute force of sheer sound. The conversations tend to go like this. Student, I'm bored. Me, how can you be bored? You're simultaneously checking Facebook, updating your fantasy football team, eating a protein bar, and playing Candy Crush Saga on your phone. Student, what? I forgot what we were talking about. Me, you should read Camden Joy. Student, is that a person? Me, sort of. It's actually a pseudonym for this guy, Tom Edelman. Student, so did he, write, books? Me, yes, he did. You do know what a book is, right? Student, oh yeah, I'm really into Murakami right now. Me, God help us. Student, what's wrong with Murakami? Me, nothing's wrong with Murakami. I like Murakami fine. It's just that he's not the only writer who ever wrote a book. Student, duh. I'm not stupid. It's him, J.D. Salinger, and that Hamlet dude. Me, you mean Shakespeare? Student, I guess. Me, just check out Camden Joy, you'll like him. He started off handwriting these long essays about bands on giant posters and wheat pasting them around downtown New York. Then he wrote this pamphlet about Frank Black from the Pixies, and then one about Al Green, and then he wrote this crazy novel about Liz Phair, which isn't actually about Liz Phair, but about this writer coincidentally named Camden Joy who gets assigned to write a book about Liz Phair, but he doesn't know who Liz Phair is, so he draws stick figures of a woman playing a guitar instead of writing the book. And then when he finally hears Liz Phair's music, he becomes convinced that Liz Phair is actually his high school girlfriend who has since changed her name, and then he goes into a gun store and decides he's maybe going to try to kill her. Student, who's Liz Phair? Me, you don't know Liz Phair? Student, no. Me, sings first verse of divorce song. Student, shakes head. Me, Liz Phair was the original hipster. Student, dude, hipsters are like so 2012. Me, then what are artsy slacker types called now? Student, I'm not into labels, man. Me, mutters, fucking hipster. Student, what was that? Me, nothing, just read Camden Joy. Student, do they sell it for Kindle? Me, holds gun up to head and shoots. 2, barriers of entry. When I say I have trouble explaining Camden Joy's project, I'm not just referring to these kinds of frustrating who's-on-firstian dialogues with 90s ignorant undergrads, but the larger task of synthesizing Joy's perplexing oeuvre. Usually, all I can come up with is something akin to the extended summary I just performed, a summary in which Joy's imaginative weirdness is well established, but that provides little in the way of what that weirdness is trying to take on, which is to say Joy's work is resistant to criticism. In part, this is a problem of genre. Should Joy's poster campaigns, for example, be read as graffiti art, some kind of stopping point on the narrative road from bombed subway cars to Banksy? Or do we read them within the context of rock criticism, Joy as natural heir to Grail Marcus and Lester Bangs, and a clear antecedent to the early days of Pitchfork? Someone studying new media might see the posters as fascinating artifacts of the pre-Twitter era, when instead of opining freely into the vast ether of cyberspace, unpublished writers had to literally write on walls in order to place their words in the public sphere. But genre is not the only barrier of entry. In the best of Joy's work, there is an enigmatic quality to the texts themselves that makes them both provocative and seemingly impenetrable. Joy might be a pop artist and a punk rocker, but he skillfully and willfully managed to avoid the great trapping of both pop art and punk rock: obviousness. Unlike, say, a giant Jeff Koons balloon puppy, or one of Bad Religion's two-chord political bombasts, or, for an apples-to-apples comparison, a Dave Eggers novel, Joy's agenda is opaque. As the poet John Berryman once wrote of his friend Delmore Schwartz, his mission was obscure but real. His work has the dignity of ambiguity. Let's take the case of Boy Island, a novel in which the absurdity of its premise is never addressed, acknowledged, or even slyly winked at within the text. Why has Joy inserted someone called Camden Joy into the band Cracker? Is it pure postmodern playfulness? Some kind of commentary on fandom and the slipperiness of identity? A comic veil for a journalistic character assault on Cracker frontman David Lowery? And what does it have to do with the Gulf War, which blares constantly in the novel's background, hardly discussed, transmitted via the van's radio as the band cruises southern highways en route to the next gig? Perhaps some parallel is to be drawn between Cracker's tour and the US military's tour of duty, but the parallel itself is elusive, and the invisible string connecting this leitmotif to the central narrative is haunting in its absence. 3. Why the whole dancing about architecture thing is bullshit. There's this old and frankly idiotic adage that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. Supposedly, the quote comes from Frank Zappa, who was a clever dude, and it's a clever line because it preemptively rebuffs negative criticism by negating criticism as a form. It's bullshit because there's a long tradition in which a piece of art in one medium successfully explores a piece of art in another. I don't know any dances about architecture per se, though I'm sure they exist, but I do know poems, paintings, and songs. There's the concentrated vertigo of Federico Garcia Lorca's Cry to Rome from the Tower of the Chrysler Building. There's Diego Rivera's critique of New York's capitalist architecture in his mural Frozen Assets. And more recently, there's neo-Christian banjo strummer Sufjan Stevens, who's written operatic odes to the Sears Tower, the houses of Frank Lloyd Wright, and the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, among other public structures. Maybe what the Zappa quote gets at, though, is that about is the wrong word. These pieces aren't about their subjects so much as they're in conversation with them. They call out to each other across mediums. When I first read The Last Rockstar book, or Liz Phair, A Rant, I spent a long time trying to reconcile Joy's decision to fictionalize Liz Phair's biography. Liz Phair wondered too. I recently tweeted at her asking for her thoughts on the book, and she replied, "Pretty weird." And yet, despite the biographical liberties taken, the book ultimately does seem to access some deep truth in Liz Phair's music. What Joy's doing, I came to realize, is what we all do when we listen to music. If smell is the sense that triggers memory, then sound is the one that triggers fantasy. Think of a child's fear of strange sounds in the house and the terrifying creatures those sounds can conjure. Rock lyrics tend toward the vague and elliptical. Songs are often directed at an unnamed you. Lines and verses lie like islands. The listener creates the ocean in between. The fantasy in which Liz Phair morphs into Camden Joy's ex-girlfriend speaks to the intimate way that we experience great art and the way that it reaches out to us with familiarity and uncanny understanding, as if it had been part of our lives all along. In this, my project echoes Joy's, and it's why I won't succeed. To analyze Joy's work is to fail. One is better off asking it to dance.